Hare Krishna. Question from Peter: how can millions of Hindus consider these mythological stories of Krishna, which are so unscientific, irrational, supernatural? How can they take these activities so literally and delight in these activities having actually happened? And how can they ascribe such anthropomorphic characteristics to God? Isn't it obvious that these stories are just projections of the human imagination onto God, who is the supreme being, who is so great that he cannot be conceived, so people have imagined and imposed something on him? Answer: all of us come from certain cultural and intellectual backgrounds, and that's why we have some cultural presuppositions and intellectual embeddedness. The questions you are asking are natural for somebody who is coming from a Western background, which comes from two primary threads. One is the Greco-Christian attitude towards theology, the Christian theology, and then there is the post-enlightenment rationality, which is the scientific attitude. And when those two prisms are used to look at Krishna's pastimes, naturally these presumptions will come up. So now we have to evaluate whether these prisms actually reveal the truth, and whether there may be another way of looking at things which might be reveal the truth in a different and maybe a deeper way. So let's look at rather than refuting the misconceptions, let's focus on understanding the origin of the misconceptions, and then we will see why that will make it self-evident why these misconceptions arise at all and how they are not necessarily the right conceptions. So now in the Abrahamic tradition, God is considered to be the supreme being, but he is quite distant and opaque, beyond all human categorization and comprehension, and that's why there is no vision of God that is given. There is now, of course, it is described that some prophets like Muhammad is supposed to have gone and seen God, and also Moses is supposed to have seen God, but he saw the God back of God. But the idea is, in general, God is not visible, and there is now this invisibility of God has been made into a virtue by Christian theologians by making it a principle that God is by definition beyond human conception, and therefore the absence of positive description of God has been attempted to be made into a virtue. But that is not necessarily true. If we are truly interested in God, we will look for whether God has given revelation anywhere else, whether he has revealed his own nature, his own power, his personal form. Now the Bible does talk about God being person, but it does not talk about his form much. So now if we are interested in God, then rather than judging all traditions from our tradition's perspective, we will try to see where we can objectively get knowledge about God, because whatever ultimately all traditions are means to know God. So yes, there may be an element of revelation in each tradition, but after the revelation there is so much subsequent analysis and expansion and development which may not always be pure. So now the point here is that the various religious theistic traditions are like means to attain God. It's like a university where we get knowledge. So if in a particular university, a particular kind of knowledge is not available, say advanced computer science is not available in a particular university, now does that mean that there is no such branch as advanced computer science? Or does that mean that if some other college claims to be having advanced computer science, one has to trash that college? saying, oh, this is all just hocus pocus, they're just exaggerating, there's no such field like this. No, unfortunately, that one has to be open-minded to see whether that college actually talks about computer science in a systematic way and examine the content of the knowledge. Don't just impose. We shouldn't impose our own preconceptions on that college teaching modules. So similarly, yes, it is that in the Christian tradition, there is in the Bible, there is no positive revelation of God's form. The knowledge of God's self-existence is not given, and that's why this lacking is somehow made into a virtue by some theologians by saying that God cannot be known at all. But if God is truly infinite, then does he not have the potency to make himself reveal to the finite? He certainly has that, and that is what he has done in the Vedic tradition. So in the Vedic tradition, through the scriptures and through the revelations of the saints, the form of God has been revealed repeatedly. And not only has the form been revealed, it is described that God himself descends to this world and reveals his form during his incarnations. Actually, the word incarnation is imperfect translation. During his avtaras or descent, we can say. But the word incarnation is largely in circulation now. That's why I use it sometimes. But the point here is that Krishna is God in his full godhood, but manifesting the opulence of love. So now it may seem that Krishna's pastimes are just like a playful human's pastimes, playful human's antics, and that it may seem that they are just projections of human imagination. Now yes, it has happened on many occasions that many people have tried to imagine what God could be like, and they have come up with their own imaginations. In fact, this has happened within the Christian tradition also, where in the Sistine Chapel, God is depicted as an old man and stretching his hand to lift Adam up. Now in that picture, actually Adam looks more attractive than God, which is actually in one sense we could say violence to the all attractiveness of God, to depict God in an unattractive way so that human being appears more attractive than God. So that is an imagination of that is an example of human imagination being projected onto God, and God being ascribed a form which does not do justice to his all attractive excellence. But in the Vedic tradition, there is a profound theology which goes into this conception of Krishna. So this is a revelation coming down, and it is a richer revelation where it is described that God in his self-existential glory desires not the supremacy of godhood, but the intimacy of love, and therefore he conceals his godhood and he acts like a human being so that there can be human-like reciprocations of love, intimate, uninhibited reciprocations of love between him and his devotees. And that is how actually love between God and his devotees flourishes fully at the highest spiritual realm. So actually this is a vision of God which, far from being a projection of human imagination, is a revelation of the most heartwarming reality in existence. The reality that love reigns supreme in the transcendental realm, and God is love. That is talked about in the biblical tradition, but what it means is revealed in this tradition, that God is the most loving and the most lovable person, and he loves his devotees so much, and he invites all living beings to become his devotees. That means he loves all living beings so much that he is ready to subordinate his godhood so that love can reign supreme, so that his devotees can love him unimpededly. So the revelation that is pointed to in the Bible is actually delineated beautifully, fulfillingly in the Vedic tradition through the Bhagavatam's revelation of Krishna as God. So now, because in the Christian tradition, prior to that and parallel with that also, there have been many anthropomorphic projections where God has been conceived in different ways. So many people from the Abrahamic traditions, when they encounter the conception of Krishna as God, they often project what is familiar for them onto Krishna. So it's not that Krishna is a anthropomorphic projection of human imagination. Rather, the notion that Krishna is an anthropomorphic projection, that is a cultural projection of a Christian, of a mind, of an inflexibly Christian rooted mind that cannot expand to be open to other conceptions of God. So one really has to choose seriously, am I interested in religion or am I interested in God? Am I interested in college or am I interested in knowledge? When one becomes open to receive knowledge about God from whatever sources the knowledge comes about, then you will understand that actually the same conception of God that is pointed out in the Bible and the Abrahamic traditions, that is delineated much more in richer and sweeter detail in the Bhagavatam. Now, so this is with respect to the obstacle coming from the idea that God is beyond human comprehension or categorization. So this is not a categorization as per human categories. It is described in the Vedic literature that the highest reality is personal, and the Bhagavad Gita says, through the metaphor of a upside down tree, urdhva moolam adha shakam ashwatham prahuravayam, that this world is like a reflection of the spiritual world. So whatever is present here is present because it is present in the original. So as in the biblical tradition also it says, as above, so below, as below, so above. So actually what does that mean? That means that why do we have the urge for relationships? Why do we have a longing for love? Because we are parts of God, and that longing is present in God also. And we are meant to attain perfection by relating with Him on a one-to-one basis, as He does relate with all His devotees. So the point is that this is not a contradiction. The Vedic conception of God is not a contradiction of the Christian revelation. It is the perfection of the Christian revelation. And one has to put aside one's limiting preconceptions about the unknowability of God and actually become open to the richer revelation of God that is available in the Vedic tradition. Now, as far as the scientific, unscientific or irrational idea is concerned of the conception of Krishna's stories, we have to understand that the scientific way is only one way of looking at the world, and there is no reason to believe that science is the only way. In fact, that idea is not scientific, it is called scientistic. There is a different school of thought called scientism, and scientism is an unscientific proposition because there is no scientific experiment to prove that science is the only way to knowledge. So the Vedic worldview, as related to the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam, actually accepts the jurisdiction of science as a subordinate reality. It is said in the Bhagavad Gita 9.10 that Maya Adhyakshena Prakriti Suyate Sacharacharam Hetunanena Kaunteya Jagad Viparivartate. By the order of material, under the supervision of Krishna, by the order of material nature, things happen in this world. So that order of material nature can refer to the various principles and laws that science has discovered. But above them is Krishna. So Krishna, He is like the Sarveshwareshwara, like the boss of all bosses, the God of all gods. So just as when we are going along the road, we have to follow the traffic signals. Now the traffic signals, when the red signal comes, we stop, and everything goes along very systematically. But say when the Prime Minister comes along, when the President comes along, and when there is a national emergency, at that time the signals pattern itself may change, it may stop. Now those are very exceptional situations, but they can happen, and their happening does not prove two things. First is that they actually happened. One should not try to say that it didn't happen only, it is just bad data, it's imagination. It actually happened, but that does not mean that there is no law also. Normally there is law, but at how the signals move, but sometimes that law can be suspended. So similarly, sometimes when Krishna descends to this world, He can suspend the laws of nature because He is above the laws of nature. For example, when Krishna lifts Govardhan hill, how can he lift the weight of such a huge hill on his hand? Of course he has power, but even if he didn't have power, why does Govardhan hill have that weight? That weight is there because actually there is a law of gravity in action. So Krishna can suspend the law of gravity because he's the lord of gravity. He's the lord of everything. So he causes the law of gravity to operate, and when he wants, he can cause the law of gravity to stop. So now these miracles are actually there in the biblical tradition also, although they are at a much smaller scale. Say for example, God caused the river to part so that the original Jews who were fleeing from Egypt could cross over the river. Or there are the miracles which say Jesus caused a dead man to come back alive. Now that does not mean these miracles, again, it is not that they happen all the time, nor does it mean that they never happen. Normally there is a law, orderly way of happening of things, but when there is God or his agents, they can cause the suspension of the ordinary way of things. So for some specific purposes at specific times. So for a devotee, that God can do this is not just self-evident. Actually, it is relishable. It is not only intellectually acceptable; it's intellectually relishable. How? Because intellectually, it is intellectually acceptable because one understands the laws of nature have the jurisdiction, but above them is the lawmaker. Above them is the lord of nature, and that the lord of nature can subordinate the law of nature demonstrates the glory of that lord of nature, and devotees delight in that glory, and in this way actually it demonstrates the supremacy of God, and devotees delight in the demonstration of power, which is often impelled by a desire to reciprocate love with his devotees. So that exhibition of power and love is what devotees delight in. So actually what the Bhagavad Gita is a profound conception of God that is neither anthropomorphic nor unscientific. No, God's miracles are not against science, they are above science. And God's conception is not a projection of human imagination, rather the human reality is a perversion of the divine reality, and we are meant to, by seeing God's wonderful pastimes, are meant to rise from this distorted reflection of human reality and enter into the transcendental reality that is depicted in God's pastimes. And if one still thinks that this is all pre-scientific, irrational, anthropomorphic, then one should just be open-minded to study the literature that has given back some of the greatest minds in human history, greatest intellects, Ramacharya, Madhvacharya, Vyasatirtha, Jiva Goswami, Baldev Vidyabhushan, some of the greatest minds. They are great scholars, and if one studies their work, so there is so much logic, there is so much reasoning, there is profound scriptural quoting also, but there is so much logic and reasoning, and one can see that these are not people who are going to accept irrational things. They follow rationality, and where they take us is not to an irrational level, but to a trans-rational level. Thank you. Hare Krishna.